stability, boundless faith within. All density, I solemnly declare, could feel the tension inside of here. I am a hopeful hypocrite, trying to do the best that I can. But if you ask me who's responsible for the state of this country today, everybody, if you agree with me when I raise my hand on the say, I am.
30 minutes past the hour of 6 o'clock is a beautiful Tuesday morning in Port of Spain. Well, folks, the question is, how many more? And that is the question on the lips of many who are mourning the death of yet another young woman. Yesterday's autopsy on the body of Miss Andrea Barrett came back inconclusive, while a prime suspect in her case died at hospital. Women's groups and citizens are calling for more to be done, as safety concerns seem to be once again at an all-time high. How do we deal with the trauma faced by families, women, citizens in general? We are joined by Mr. Hanif Benjamin, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Human Development. He is a clinical therapist and clinical traumatologist. Good morning, Mr. Benjamin.
Good morning to you, and thank you for having me.
In the midst of the pandemic and all of this violent death, have you walked with good news for us this morning?
Well, I don't know about the good news. I mean, the good news is that we're still here and we're able to walk through the challenges and help a wounded nation. And funny you would talk about, on top of the pandemic, because what I'm seeing here is a compounded trauma. And I always like to use the red onion as an example. If you slice it down the middle, you see you see the rings going up. And that is what we are facing as a society, where we are seeing trauma after trauma after trauma, and with one not being fully healed or processed, another one is coming on top. So when you add all those layers of trauma, we have a complex situation on our hands. And with a complex situation brings about a complex response as well.
Thank you, Hanif. But bear with me for a second. Let's see if we can't do a little root cause analysis in all of this. Because, I mean, in many parts of our society, we are attempting to fix the problem after the fact. What I want us to really begin with is trying to understand the root cause of this trauma. And, of course, we're talking about violence.
Right.
And, of course, the issue is the cause of the violence. Let's talk about the causes that bring about this kind of violence in our society. We're supposed to be a so-called rich nation, aren't we? We're supposed to be well off, aren't we? So then this energy, commodity, Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, why is it that we are suffering from all of this violence when we should all be living comfortably off of the energy sector and so on?
I don't know to what extent the richness or the rich nation can protect or even suggest that there is no trauma. With every nation, with every society, from the most primitive to the most well-advanced, you will find trauma. Because you see, and you will find violence because we are dealing with the human being. We are dealing with the person. And each person interacts in their society differently.
But what is the motivation of the violence, though? I think that's what we really want to get at. We've now categorized the various forms of violence in an effort to treat with it appropriately. We're saying, look, this is a multifaceted problem.
Right, but a multifaceted problem from the perspective, again, from the individual, because your motivation is very different to my motivation. Your level of resiliency is very different to my level of resiliency. And the reason why I'm saying that is because let's take it from the beginning. Let's take it from a child. My experiences as a child is very different to your experiences. And I mean, Sigmund Freud made it very clear. He said, according to your trajectory, what happens in the stages of development will determine what happens later on in life. And I hold true to that belief, because if as a child you have in fact been traumatized, if as a child you have been brutalized and whatever else, then that will affect your adult life. Here we have a lot of children walking around as adults, a lot of hurt people who have never dealt with their issues of childhood trauma. You talk about, we are a rich nation, but then we have to talk about the whether it is equitable across the board. Because while we might be a rich nation, clearly there are people who are living in certain sects who are not as rich as we would all want to be. And so every person, every family, every community has its own challenges. And so when you need to look at the root cause analysis, we have to look at what is going on at the beginning phase. We cannot want to beat children, sexually abuse children, verbalize children, all of these things, and expect that when these children grow to be adult, we expect a perfect person.
Right.
And so the question is, what is a perfect person in respect to who I am and what I have been through in terms of my journey? So when you want to talk about violence and you want to talk about root cause, we have to consider whether Trinidad and Tobago is indeed a violent society. I have said it over and over. We are a violent society. That is how we solve issues. That is how we treat situation. And this situation, this unfortunate, horrible situation, and I mean, I cannot imagine the pain of this family and community, is something that we have been experiencing year after year after year.
But you see, this is the thing, Hanif. You're the expert on this matter. And I'm asking you, if you state categorically, based on your empirical evidence, that Trinidad and Tobago is a violent society, okay, well then, what are the implications of that statement?
We are living the implication here then. We are living the implication, and the implication is here, a society who is very wound up right now, a society who is traumatized. And when you have people who are traumatized, you're talking about mental health situations stepping in, post-traumatic stress disorder is coming in there, depression, anxiety. We're talking about a workforce who might not be as motivated as they should be. We're talking about productivity dropping. We're talking about school challenges. We're talking about children unable to actively be part of an education system to advance themselves. You're talking about families who cannot seem to find a way out of the challenges that they are in. So when you talk about the implication, we're talking about a societal implication.
Fine. So then let's talk now about, therefore, are we as a nation, with the state interventions across the board, are we pursuing the appropriate strategies, and are we measuring the correct things?
Well, I will start at the end, the measuring. I am of the opinion that we really don't measure. We do. And so if you look at the Ministry of Social Development across all governments in the last 40 years, now, let me not be so adventurous, let's say 20 years. In the last 20 years, check how much money has been spent on social intervention.
Right.
Now, the governments of the day, whether it is this or the other, they put social measures in place,
Right.
And I applaud them for that. The question is, are we better off with those social, having received those social measures? Are we indeed better off? And the question comes, are we measuring,
right,
when you give a person $1, when you give a person a food card, are we measuring whether that person is on food card for 5 years, 10 years, or are we saying we were able to get this person from point A to point B? I call it the step method, right? We move from one step to the other. We meet them at the bottom, and it is our job to get them to the top of the step. The top of the step meaning I can now be self-sufficient. Are we better off for the billions of dollars spent there? The question is, are we able to measure from point A to point B?
That's the thing. What is causing the deficiency in terms of the empirical evidence, gathering the empirical evidence, measuring the progress, measuring the efficacy of the strategies, the policies being adopted? I mean, don't the politicians, the public servants, don't they want to know for sure whether or not these particular strategies are working? I mean, what's the point of having strategies if you don't know if they're working?
Well, I can't speak to what they would want. I would want to know if the measures put in place to solve a particular problem has in fact worked. I would want to know if giving billions of dollars would have worked. I want to know if I open up a place where people can come for counseling. I would want to know, are they coming? What's the rate? Men, women. And I'm sure they're collecting data. But I cannot speak to what they do with their data. But I am saying, when I look at the trajectory of the social tapestry of Trinidad and Tobago, we are receiving a lot of help, a lot of grant, a lot of this, a lot of that. And so the question is, should that be the only thing that should be done, or should that be augmented with other types of professional services to help move a person? You see, we're talking about violence and trauma. We have communities that is inundated with violence. That is all they know. We have communities that is just trauma-filled. That is their baseline. You can imagine your body on flight or fight mode every single day. It means that the internal workings of your body are now going to be skewed, because your heart is going to be working overtime, your liver and everything else is going to be working overtime, because your body has to produce more cortisol and all these different kind of things, the adrenaline to keep you moving. So you can imagine when a person living ready, and I want to make that point, living ready, meaning they are living as if they are ready to fight. And sometimes when you see the responses of people who have been traumatized, it's not that they're bad. It is they are living from a trauma-filled lens where their only thing is survival. What is survival for me? And that is a question we need to ask around the country in these pockets.
But you see, Mr. Benjamin, I think this is the critical thing that we need to appreciate. Is this a manageable problem in the context of how we are structured, how the public sector is structured, how the state is structured, and the kinds of interventions being pursued by the state over the past 20 years? That's our time frame. Is the problem beyond us?
I am one who is a positivist. I don't ever believe that we cannot. I always believe that with the right people and the right skill set, we can, in fact. My concern really is whether the state in itself should be doing all that they are doing. And I want to make the point. When you look at other emerging societies, the state is what you call the monitoring and evaluating perspective. They give the grant funding. And they allow the community, the people, the NGOs, the FBOs, the companies who have the expertise to do this. And then they monitor and guide. When the state in itself try to put forward all these programs, the question is it now too big to manage to get the end result that you seek? And I think in any great social understanding and underpinning in a society, you want to say, all right, we will monitor, we will give the funding, you do. And that way you will then be able to employ the people to keep a sharp eye to ensure that the interventions are in fact effective.
But you see, this is the thing, what exactly is the state monitoring? Because if we're not monitoring the progress...
But the state monitoring itself, because the state is actually designing and doing and all of this.
Right, but what are they monitoring? They're monitoring how much is disbursed to this particular CBO, FBO, NGO, and so on. I mean that's an important metric for the sake of accountability in spending public funds. But the issue really is, are we measuring the progress with which these interventions are being pursued? Do we even have the correct strategies to deal with the trauma that so many of our citizens suffer?
And I prefer to use the word that they live with, because that is what we're doing. We're living with the trauma. But I want to say this, and part of the social strategy should never just be your state, because it is a country-wide situation. And so we have academia, we have the religious, we have the business sector. All of these people combined should be the response. And so my take as a social worker, clinician, a traumatologist, is really not just one person or one track should be. It should be all of us. You see, I always like to use the pizza pie as an example of our society. Even down to the box is critical, because you cannot go to any of the pizza outlets and they give you a pizza in a bag. The box, as discarded as we discard that box is important, because that box carry. You see, the flour, the ketchup, every ingredient is critical. And a pizza cannot come with 11 slices if it's a 12-slice pizza. So the question is, are we as a society, our business sector, the religious sector, the government sector, the non-government, the educational sector, are we doing our part collectively? Now, that is a key word there. Because what I realized in Trinidad and Tobago, everybody likes to tout themselves, I did and I did and I did. But the question is, we have great people doing things in their own corner, as opposed to a collective coming together and saying, you know what, we have this violence problem. We are going to raise $1 million to do proper research. We are going to donate $3 million to do an intervention for children and adolescents.
Let me ask you this then. Which entity ought to coordinate this gathering of consensus so that the appropriate strategies, the appropriate resources are applied to the problem properly defined? Who is supposed to do that?
So let me tell you this, and I could tell it from my example working up the Caribbean and even in America. What happened is the state said, listen, we have a problem, we need help. We want to research this violence and we want to come up with a strategy. And we're inviting tenders for a company who are so inclined to come forward to be that coordinating body. Their role is to coordinate. And you coordinate from the research mechanism, the findings, to intervention strategies, to monitoring and evaluation. You see? And so it cannot be the state. It cannot be the state, but the state can be the driving force behind getting the money and all of this. And that is why I'm saying, if all of these sectors come together and say, we are living this problem, I cannot understand, all of us, what I call collective trauma, an entire country suffers. And I'm not just talking about the horrendous killing of these 2 females this year. I am talking about how much killings last year. I thank God that it went down a bit, right? And what about let's use the same 20-year strategy. What about how many people have been killed in the last 20 years in this small 1.4, give or take, million population? And if that is not a concern for each and every citizen, then we have in a wrong conversation.
But then everybody's fighting in their own corner. Everybody has retreated
Correct.
to their own corner.
And so that is a major effect of trauma. And that is why it is important to have that driving force. Because everybody's trying to protect itself. Everybody's trying to see what I can get for myself. Everybody's trying to see how I can protect my family. Some people may choose to leave. Some people choose to close a business. Some people choose to go private. Whatever you do. But we must recognize that it's not working. We must recognize that going in a balloon, a cocoon, is not working. And so as a society, we need to say, listen, let us come together. You see how we put the money forward for the ransom and all of this? That is what a society needs to be doing. Let's say, okay, this is what we want to do. This is how much we're going to throw in here. Let us get the research. Let us get the thing. If you notice, Hayden, we really don't have any structured type of intervention from a societal perspective. We don't have that.
But this is the thing, Mr. Benjamin. We have ministries. And taxpayers fund these ministries. And you have to ask yourself, well, with all of this brain power, this intellectual capacity gathered under one roof, with one particular mandate, why is it we can't seem to get to the level of proper coordination, proper monitoring, evaluation, and really dealing with these problems from a statewide perspective, a national perspective? So what's the problem happening at the ministerial level?
I cannot speak to that, but what I can say is that if we understand the challenges that is before us, not from a pocket perspective, because you see, a pocket is only part of a pants. You see, but you have to take you can't wear the pocket alone. You have to wear the entire pants, you see. And so we treat the situation very isolatedly. We treat this situation and that situation. But what I want the country to see is the connectivity between childhood trauma and adult response.
I wonder too, Hanif, if we're defining the problem properly. If we have identified the problem effectively, and thus we are now in a stage where we can say, listen, specifically, These are the things that must happen across Trinidad and Tobago. Specifically, in these particular communities, this is the kind of intervention, and specifically, this is the data we want to gather so that we can measure whether or not it's working. Right. Why can't we have that level of coordination?
Well, you see, again, I don't think that it's not happening, but it's not happening on the scale, because I know there's really good work happening in East Port of Spain. Right? I know that for a fact. I've been part of that in the past, and I know that great work is happening there from a governmental perspective as well as NGO. But the question is it wide enough? Does it cover the gambit of the entire country?
But that's what we're supposed. That's why we elect governments.
But again,
not just to deal with a specific area and maybe benefit in some political way, but to deal with the matter from a nationwide perspective.
But again, you see, you keep saying the government, but I am saying society, because it cannot be a government, but it can be a society. Because I tell you this, there are people in the society who benefit from the way things are.
I hear you on that. We're going to come back to that in a second. I'm going to run to a quick break. Folks, we have a lot more with our guests after the break, but here's a reminder of the COVID-19 protocols on your screen. Of course, wear a mask, keep your distance, stay home if you're ill, clean then sanitize surfaces, wash your hands often with soap and water, or use an alcohol-based sanitizer as we have done this morning. Folks, we're going to run to this quick break and come right back with more on trauma in our society. Welcome back, folks. 23 and a half minutes before the hour 7 o'clock, and we're talking to Mr. Hanif Benjamin, clinical psychologist, clinical therapist, and traumatologist. We're talking about social and cultural trauma in Trinidad and Tobago, and there's one fundamental question that I'm going to ask Mr. Hanif Benjamin right now. Sir, can we fix this, or are we already over the precipice?
We can fix this.
How?
We can fix this.
How?
By the things that we spoke about earlier, I believe that we can. I think it takes a resolve of a people. I think we collectively can, in fact, do this. I think that Trinidad and Tobago has an enormous wealth of brilliant people, of social scientists. I believe that we have sufficient funding in this country, and I'm not talking from a government perspective, but I'm talking about in the country. But if we wanted to fix this.
But we must coordinate properly. So does that mean we need to revisit how the appropriate ministry is structured, revisit how the budgeting is done for that ministry, and really redefine the mandate?
But you see, what you're talking about, again, I can't speak to the inner workings of ministry, but what you're asking a ministry or a government to do is to solely focus on an issue.
No,
remember.
Well, at least in the context of how you engage in your strategic planning and so on going forward, that this particular issue must be a key objective to achieve in the context of solving social trauma, cultural trauma in this society.
I agree. I think the approach has to change. But I can't tell a ministry what and how to do their job.
Why not?
But that's not my place.
You're the citizen. They are working on your behalf. Tell them what you need.
I can suggest the way forward. I can suggest the way forward, which I have in terms of, again, I honestly believe that it should not be the government's or any government's role to have programs themselves. I think the government role should be about getting the professionals to do their job, right? Give the money to the people who have the skill set, the ability, the wherewithal to do the job.
In other words, they ought to lead the process.
Correct. I also believe that our academia need to get more involved. I think that, again, pockets of research is happening, but not on a national level. Not on a national level to say, listen, Trinidad and Tobago, we want to find out why we are a violent society. And we're going to put $5 million towards the research and design of a program. That is what we need out here, right? But more importantly, we need to understand from an individual perspective why people feel the way they do. why people behave the way they do. And again, it goes back to our childhood, it goes back to our upbringing, it goes back to our interaction, what I call the social environment. Yuri Bronfenbrenner in 1979 coined the social, the ecological perspective, because I am one who believes that every one of us, each and every one of us, we are but part of a whole. We cannot operate in isolation. We cannot operate by ourselves in a corner doing we are part of a whole. And listen, over time, the situation changes. People changes, a society change. And so we interact with one another, from business to religion to government to everything. And so collectively, that's the only way I see to fix this.
But tell me a bit. You see, sometimes when we speak in these terms, sometimes people don't fully understand the gravity of the situation. I wonder if you could share with us some of the data that is already available in terms of suicide rates and so on. Let's deal with that one particular issue, especially amongst young people. Are we any different to any other society?
That's the point. No.
In terms of our existing rates of suicide, or what we are seeing here. Because if we say that this is all normal and this happens in all societies, then all of a sudden the urgency to fix it disappears.
You see, and I'm glad how you brought that point up, because the last time I checked, which was last year, we were still about the third in this region, I think behind Suriname and Guyana, in terms of suicidality. It is also saying that young people are dying at an enormous rate. As a matter of fact, suicide is the leading cause of death in children and adolescents, right? Males, to be exact, right? And we see it in Trinidad. We are no different to other societies. Even the level of violence that we experience, some people would say that we are quite low. When you think about, if you want to disaggregate, females in terms of death, that is quite low in terms of other places. That is quite low in terms of other types of killing and other gender. And so when you disaggregate the information, are we like other nations? Yes.
But you see, that's the problem. This comparative analysis.
But you asked for the comparative.
Yes, I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. This comparative analysis, we have to be able to treat with these social issues differently as we would treat with macroeconomic comparative analysis.
Right.
This social problem that we face, one is too many. One is too many. That's the nature of the comparative analysis. You see, because the minute you say, look, we are much lower than Mexico, we're much lower than Colombia as far as suicide. I'm just picking as far as suicide is concerned. You see, it takes away the urgency to address the problem, because the first response is, well, we're not that different to any other country, and that typically means it's not urgent anymore.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree with that perspective. One, you asked for that data, and that data is critical, because whether we like it or not, the international funders look at that data and they budget, they plan based on those data. So while I understand the thinking that it might lower the threshold, I don't agree, because that data is critical as well. It doesn't mean that we should be less complacent, or more complacent rather, because it is lower than XYP. While I understand the international community that we are part of, we still need to understand Trinidad society and the Trinbagonian challenges that we face. But you have to also look at it in relation to other parts of the world. And I am not saying that to diminish by any stretch of the imagination that it is important here. But the point of importance is important in this context, because the question is, only sometimes, and this goes across the board, only when you have been touched by a tragic situation, it becomes important to you.
How do we raise the profile, the national profile? How do we raise and create a higher level of awareness about the issue of trauma? Because, we've come through generations that will tell you, well, big man, wipe your tears now. We're not in the crying thing. Men not in the crying thing. Fix your mix. Right? He's a big man.
Oh, you're being very kind in your words. Because you know that is not what it said.
Well, this is live TV, but And that kind of narrative is what has passed from generation to generation. Men don't cry. He's a little girl or what? Don't cry. And we're not treating with the truest impact of this trauma.
So go back again. Go back to when I talk about the beginning. The beginning is where we have to go. Let me look at it from a continuum of care. The beginning, the middle, and the end. Right now, we have children, as you and I speak right now at 6:44 in the morning, there are children being sexually, physically, emotionally, psychologically abused right now. As we speak, it is happening. We need to treat with that. We need to treat with children who was brutalized, but now might be adolescent. They are going through their own level of traumatic response right now. And then we have to deal with the adults who would have been traumatized from child, received no help, adolescent, and now adult. You see here, we have to look at the continuum of care. And when you talk about fixing, we have to work with every area. We have to work with children to protect them. We have to work with the adolescent who were in fact victims and now living through this pain and trauma. And we have to deal with the adult who had no help and developed negative coping mechanisms over the many years. And so you have to understand that, you see that childhood? Children are not raised in Mars. You and I raise children, mothers and fathers, auntie and grandmother. So who exactly is telling that boy he's a sissy when he cries? Who exactly is telling that boy to man up? Who is telling that boy to show your strength? And worse yet, who is telling that boy what he should be when he becomes a man? Hold for me one second. Hold for me. Because if I never see my father hug my mother or hug me, then how do you expect as a man for me to hug my children or to embrace my wife? If I never see my father go down on his knees or my mother go down on her knees and pray and worship, then how do you expect me to be a praying mantis when I grow up? It can't work like that, Hayden. So when you talk about what is the change that we need to change the way we interact with our children. We need to change the way we treat and train and develop our children. Because I kid you not, I am not surprised by the behaviors that I see. Because we teach them who and what they should become. And then when they become who we tell them to become, we are now all of a sudden surprised. And I cannot understand why you are surprised, because we told a child what to do. Here then, a child is a sponge. They will absorb everything. That's the role of a sponge. The sponge is not going to decipher good, bad, or indifferent. So when you cuss on the road, when you disrespect, when you slap, you smoke, you do this, you are in fact saying to your son, you are saying to your daughter, son, this is who you should become. When I come home and I'm tired from work on a day, and I come and I roll a spliff and I sit down and I relax and I roll the joint.
Legally.
Now, what do you think I tell him, a child?
You see, Mr. Benjamin, and here's the thing. We would understand that there are forces of socialization in our society.
Correct.
There is religion, there is education, there is the nuclear family, there is the wider community and village of the child, and so on. There is the media. All of these are forces of socialization that impact on the mind. So I'm asking you, given where we are today, given some of the data that you have, are we able to reverse this? And if the answer is yes, tell me where to start.
But outside of bringing a proposal for you here, I don't know what to say to you again, but you are correct. All of these things are competing forces on the human mind. Media, church, everything. And so, again, if all of these are competing forces on the human mind, then obviously for me, they are the ones to bring about the change that we seek. For example, changing in your television programming, right? Changes in the radio programming, from what people say as presenters to what they do. Very critical, because whether you like it or not, if a radio presenter says something, chances are people are going to believe what they're saying to be fact. You understand? And just so strange, just yesterday I was looking at social media and a certain politician made a statement and parts of the statement was published to be true. And when you look at social media, it outraged an already hurting society. Only when you did your own research, you realize that it was corrupt and it was not the true essence of what had to be said. That's unfortunate. And let me tell you this. So when you talk, so the media role here should be verify, check, ensure before we run with these things. Because then when we do that, we are angering an already angry society for reasons that are ill-intended.
Right, but is not the role of the individual, that the individual must take responsibility for what they believe. I mean, the adage, you don't believe everything you see, or you don't believe everything you read. You understand?
I agree with you, but there is a responsibility. Hidden, again, if we're talking the truth and if we're talking about change, while I understand that there is an individual responsibility, there is also a corporate responsibility in every sector, including business.
Now listen to me, and let's understand this very clearly. We call this a democracy.
Correct.
We call this a market-driven economy. We say we operate under the ethos of capitalism. There is no law that says that a corporate entity must abide by a certain level of responsibility.
Right.
Because we say, this is a democracy. I have freedom. I have certain rights.
But then how are we going to change then?
Okay, well
how
then
are we going to change?
We must begin at the very beginning, as you're saying. So then, must we now ensure that there's a greater level of responsibility from all of these entities? And to do so, we must have the laws in place.
The laws are in place.
The laws are in place. The enforcement of the law.
There we go. But you see, not everything that is legal is ethical, and not everything that is ethical is legal.
Yes, but we also subscribe to the doctrine of the separation of church and state.
Correct.
So the issue of moral versus legal.
No, that is not the point I'm making here with that. The point I'm making here is, just as you talk about the ethos of the separation, ethos of capitalism and all of that, we must understand, is it hurting or is it helping this country? Am I better off for it or am I worse off? And when you ask yourself these questions, then the next level is, what then? And I think that is where we have been dancing all morning. What then? But if we continue to believe, and if we continue to ascribe to the notion that because it is free market, I could sell this cell phone from a distributor for $1, and everybody get the same cell phone for $1. But when I reach my Hayden Company Limited, it's $40.
Correct.
That is evil. That is evil. And while I understand it is free market.
We call that pricing.
No, I call it evil.
It's strategy.
No, I call it evil.
It's profit maximization.
I call it evil. Because let me tell you this. If I truly care about a people, a nation, why do I need to make 500% profit? And so that is the responsibility that I'm speaking about. You see, man, if it is that I say, are we a better off society? Because you see, on one end, you might be making the profit. But on the other end, what is going on in terms of having to spend that money and how you do that and what goes on there? And so, Hayden, for me, I believe that one, we are a traumatized society. Two, we can in fact fix this. I think we have the ability, I think we have the money, and I think we have the skill set to change this.
We just have about a minute to go, Hanif, and I want you to tell us, are you confident that based on how things are set up right now in Trinidad and Tobago, that we can pull ourselves back from this precipice?
Let me tell you, I'm not one to pull ourselves back, but we can change this trajectory. We can change the way we go forward. I honestly believe that we have the skill set, the ability to change the trajectory that we are heading. I think if people begin to see this as a collective issue, as opposed to a personal issue, we can bring about change. I also believe that government, non-government, and everybody else, they are doing what they can in their own sphere. But that has to now radiate wider than just my own sphere to a societal change. And once we begin to do this, we will recognize that we can heal the trauma and we could prevent further trauma from happening.
Mr. Benjamin, thank you so much for your hopeful words. And
Always a pleasure.
I do hope to see in the near months and years to come that we can find this tripartite arrangement.
We can, we can.
I said we. I said we. We can find this tripartite arrangement to help save our society.
I believe we can. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin, for being here. All right, folks, we're going to run to a quick break. Here's a look at a couple of sunset images captured in Tobago this time. And with that, the news is next.